really pathetic during the Obama administration when they created the 6-month moratorium on the Gulf pumping, and they bullied British Petroleum into creating a $20 billion slush fund to help supposedly the businesses and residents down there. And I'll bet you there were strings attached, and I bet you they were pulling shenanigans where they were giving favors to certain people and not the other, because that's exactly what they do. They do this every time. And the implementing a third oil drilling moratorium, the first of two were thrown out by courts, but they've been constantly trying to stop us from becoming energy independent. There has to be, and that's why I believe the whole Department of Energy needs to come back to the states. We need a strategy of how we can move into the 22nd century, because we failed last century, and how we can move forward in being literally independent and becoming the most productive nation that we possibly can. And that's got to be our strategy. If it's not about becoming the most productive and energy efficient country in the world, and, you know, for setting the standard for a millennia, then we really need to reevaluate what we're doing. And there's ways of doing this. And I actually have a book that'll be coming out once we, get on top of this Constitution problem. I will also tell you that the Energy Department canceled 77 properly filed oil-filled developments under the Obama administration that were filed during the Bush administration. And this was done by the Interior Secretary Ken Salazar. And he basically prevented the extraction of up to 3 trillion gallons of oil buried under Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, and so forth. And so what are we doing? I mean, there was a reason why we wanted to start oil, pumping our own oil, because it moves us off of dependence and transferring wealth to these evil nations that we're buying it from. And part of those evil nations would be Russia, the Middle East, Colombia, or Venezuela, Anyway, there's been all sorts of other violations of powers. But what I'm going to do at this point is I want to move into the Federalist Papers that I didn't get into last Friday. So let me jump down to those. And as I always start off, because I got 4 minutes here, so I can get one in. Are the words in our founding documents and the words that I am citing the words of deceit, or are these words that we have been taught from our progressive education system, the progressive colleges and professors, lawyers, politicians, and bureaucrats, the words of deceit? Because they contradict what our framers have told us. And in Federalist Paper number 81, Alexander Hamilton talks about, and this is an interesting one, because this, I can see the duplicity of what Hamilton was talking, because this guy was a very smart lawyer, and he knew about the trappings of the legal system. And so what he says here is, it may, in the last place, be observed that the supposed danger of the judiciary encroachments on the legislative authority, which has been upon many occasions reiterated, is really a phantom. So I want to highlight that, is really a phantom. Particular misconstructions and contraventions of the will of the legislature may now and then happen, but they can never be so extensive as to the amount to an inconvenience or in a sensible degree to affect the order of the political system. This may be inferred with certainty from the general nature of the judicial power, from the objects to which it relates, from the manner in which it is exercised, from its comparative weakness, and from its total incapacity to support its usurpations by force. Well, what happened? It seems to me like that's exactly what the Supreme Court and the court systems have been doing, because they have been shutting everybody down. And you know why? Because after this Constitution was sold, then John Marshall and Alexander Hamilton's minions, John Marshall was one of them, basically got seated on the court, and they started lying to people, telling them that, oh, the court has all these powers. There's nowhere in the Constitution where the court can just arbitrarily pull something out of thin air and make it constitutional. It's not in the Constitution. And I've said this several times before. Had this been disclosed to the states as they were ratifying, that this court system would be able to dictate what would be constitutional and what wouldn't be, they would have rejected it. That is why there is no reference in Article 5 towards the court system. That's why there is no reference in the Constitution or in the ratification debates that of this thing called precedents and case law. If you're a lawyer and you know, by all means call me. I'll be on tomorrow, and you can set the record straight as to where we can find this reference to case law and precedents in the Constitution. It's a contract, and that contract dictated very specific powers and jurisdictions, and that was it. And the jurisdiction for the court were to those things that were enumerated within the Constitution. If it's not enumerated in the Constitution, then they don't have jurisdiction. And so marriage, abortion, all these domestic things that the Supreme Court has gotten their fingers into, even in commerce space, has been violations, but they've been fooling us over the course of 2 centuries, getting us to believe that they have all these powers, that the Constitution has granted all of these things, that they can set precedents and they can set case law. Because why? You didn't have access for 200 years to all of these source documents. But folks, we have access to these now. We can actually read these, and we don't have to let them tell us what these things say. That's why I'm actually reading these to you, and that's why this particular Federalist paper was important, because this showed the sleight of hand that Hamilton had in trying to downplay the power of the court, because look at who has really been the bully in our government system, telling bakers what they have to bake and exerting that schools had to change their bathrooms and precedents towards these agendas that have been coming from down on high.